Hi all. In this video we're going to go over how to use the Darex Endmill Sharpener grinder. This is pretty much all there is to it. It's a pretty great tool. Little light here will turn on, and then we're just going to look quickly at an end mill to have a sense of what we're going to be doing here. So on the end mill, this one happens to have 2 flutes, but you can do any number of flutes on this, straight, spiral. I don't believe you can do ball nose on this. I think you need another attachment for that. And you can do taper on here if you have any taper end mills. Underneath is the manual. It's a really good manual, so definitely poke through that. The way that this works is it puts 4 edges, or up to 4 edges on your tool per flute. So on this particular edge, if we get really close, you can see that there's the cutting edge, which is called the primary. That's that first light silver line on the right side. And on the left is the secondary clearance. And then on this leading edge, for plunging, you also have a primary and secondary. So we'll be going over how to sharpen each of those, the various bits and pieces for that. Sort of the 2 central pieces of this tool are the grinder piece. So there's this diamond wheel on here, and it has 2 different faces for cutting. It's at a preset angle. There at some point will be a little dressing stone. It's just sort of for cleaning off the diamond, and at some point we may replace the wheel, but it seems to be working just fine for now. And then here, the other piece is what holds the end mill, and this can slide as well as rotate. Right now it's stuck because it's held in air bearings, and air bearings need air to be able to move. So we'll turn this air on, going to the tool, and now this can slide really nicely. So super free floating, which is great for the purpose. And now we will look at how to hold the end mill in here. So this is held in by 5C collets. And so we'll need to grab a collet to hold this. There are a few that live here, but the main set is over by the green lathe. So we'll jump over there. And this is a 1/2 inch end mill. So we should be able to grab a 1/2 inch 5C collet, which is right here. And that is the right size, so we'll grab you. So then when we load this up into the tool, we want to make sure that both the inside and the outside are clean so that there's no dust and gunk getting in there. So you can just take your hands and make sure it's really nice and clean. Similarly on this surface, use a finger or a rag to clean it, just to make sure there's no dust or ground up pieces of metal that are gonna make that a bad fit. And then you just slide that in there. And you want the teeth, the flutes, to be totally exposed, so we'll hold up on the shank like that. And then to tighten it, we just go to the back end and holding here, tighten, and it should snug up on that collet and clamp down on our end mill. Just like that, so it's good and snug. And now it's in there. So first we're gonna do these flutes on the outsides. So the way we're going to do that is by taking this little pin, and this pin sits right in the end of the flute. So we're going to bring this into position by loosening here, sliding it in, and then we want this to sit right at the edge, as far over the edge as we can go, right underneath it. Just like that. And then we're going to lock that down. So if you had a wider end mill, then it would go further out this way, and if it was smaller, it would come further in. And we want it to ride just underneath there. And then this pin should already be calibrated so that it is at the right height. It's supposed to be 0.010 of an inch under the center line. So if you need to recalibrate it, that's how you would do that. So that's in the right place now. And what we're going to do now is bring the wheel into position for grinding the primaries. So there are a few knobs on here that we can turn. So this is going to adjust the depth of the grinder, and then this is the horizontal position. This little lever, just so you know, pulls the head away, so it gives you a little clearance, and then when you let go, it re-engages it to get back closer. And one of the good things to practice when you start is just moving the end mill through the position. So we'll start all the way at the back with that little pin resting at the back, and then you need to do something back here with your hands, which is this piece just spins freely, and this is connected to the end mill. So we're going to hold onto the end and just apply a little friction with our fingertips on that front. As we pull, it comes all the way back, and I'll show you what it looks like up front when we do that. So as I pull back, all the way up, as I pull back slowly, it's riding right on that pin, so it keeps just the leading edge of the flute in contact with the grinder wheel, and then it pops off the end. And then when we wanted to do the next flute, we would go around and guide it in along the next flute all the way to the back. And same idea, just pull back with enough friction so it stays pushed up against there. If you don't use any friction with your other fingers, it could work, but it's good just to have a little bit of positive retention on there. So that's the idea behind that action. So now we'll get it set up for actual grinding. Another note is that there's a forward and reverse down here. In general, we just always keep it in the forward position. So don't change that. That could confuse somebody. So a good thing to do before you actually do the grinding is to use a Sharpie and mark your edges. So that'll make it a lot easier to see where you're actually doing the cutting. So I'm just going to take this Sharpie and go right along both the primary and secondary cutting edges. And something to note is that when you do this, this 1/2 inch end mill is no longer going to be a 1/2 inch. It's going to be a little bit smaller than a 1/2 inch. So that's important to bear in mind, for yourself, but also if you're just grabbing an end mill out of a bin, it may not be exactly as it's advertised because it may have been sharpened before. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, perhaps measuring with calipers or doing a test cut and measuring that cut. So now that we've got the Sharpie on there, we're going to bring you, maybe you can go all the way in. So we're going to go, we don't want to grind past here, like where the flutes stop. So we're going to start just shy of that. All right, so now we're all the way, we have the stylus, that little point all the way at the back, and now we're going to turn on the grinder, and it's nicely balanced. You can tell because it's so nice and quiet. And then we're going to move the grinder forwards just until we hear it cutting. Just like that. And then down here, we can see these little gradations on the knob. So we're just going to turn it one little tick. All right, so you've turned it one tick, so now it's removing the amount of material we want. And I'm just going to pull it back. And now we've cut our primary. And you could hear that it cut a little less material on the tip than it cut at the back. So you might go again just a little bit deeper. And so you can see how it just removed the metal along the front. And so that was actually a relatively heavy cut. When we do the primary, or the secondary, we can push the primary back a little bit. You do want all of them to be the same. So if we make an adjustment, it's going to be important for us to do that over again on all the other flutes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the lever down there so that it lets me bring the grinder all the way back and then release it to re-engage. So I'm going to push this down. The grinder went back just a little bit. just enough for me to bring this forward, resting on the stylus. And now I can release it, and it'll go back to the same position the other one was cut at. Just like that. Ta-da, and it drops off the end. And if you want, you can do a second pass at the same depth just to get a nice finish. You shouldn't remove much material at this point. You want to just release this nice and gently. You don't want to drop the grinder into the metal. Okay, and we'll do the same to the other flute. Something to note is that this is a diamond wheel, so it can cut both high-speed steel and carbide cutters, which is nice. All right, so we did those, and now we're going to do the secondary. So we're going to hit the switch to turn this off. And to do the secondary, this has a neat little built-in feature, which is down here, there's this knob, and right now it's in the forward position. For the primary, and to the secondary, we just rock it back that little bit, a half inch or something, and now it dropped it down just enough that it'll hit the secondary. So I'm going to mark this again with Sharpie so that we can see exactly where we get it. Okay, so now we've marked those lines again. We're in the secondary position, and we're just going to back off the grinder a little bit so we can get a new position. All right, so we are in the secondary position here, and I've remarked with Sharpie. So we're going to turn the grinder back on, push it away with the lever down here, and make sure the stylus is right up against our flute. I'm releasing it nice and gently. And now it isn't quite touching, so I'm going to use the lower knob just to feed it forward until we hear the sound, and then advance it just one notch, and then pull back. And we can see here, if you look really closely, that we only took off a little bit off the trailing edge. So we want to take off a little more material than that, because we really just want our leading edge, the primary, to be relatively small, and then the secondary a little bit bigger. So we're going to push you forward, bring you in, drop it down into contact, and advance the lower wheel just one more notch. And try that. And that looks pretty perfect to me. So now we have where you can see the silver and no Sharpie is our secondary. It's a little hard with the glare, but then we have a much smaller primary on the leading edge. Okay, now I'm just going to do the same thing at that same depth of cut to the other flute. So moving it forward down here. Engaging. And that looks lovely. All right, so now we have those two edges, and now we can move on to the leading edges down at the tip. I'm just going to turn you off. And I'm waiting for it to stop. The machine isn't quite level, so the air bearings let it just glide forward all on its own. All right, so now for doing the ends, I'm going to look at this side of things. And what we want to do is first, we don't need the stylus anymore. So we're just going to sort of move you out of the way. And then what we're going to do is go to the back end of the tool and use this slider, which we weren't using for the sides of the flutes. This is a set screw that will hopefully be replaced soon. And then we need this little pin to engage right on here. So you can see the numbers on here. And what these are referring to is the number positions for the numbers of flutes. So if you had a 6 flute end mill, then you'd put this pin in at every time you saw 6, and it would line up so that the end of our end mill over there is flat for each of the 6 flutes. But there's only a 2 flute end mill, So we're going to go to position 2. And now you can see that number 2 is lined up there. We're just going to get that to drop right in. And then there should just be one other 2 on the opposite side of that ring. And then we're going to go over to the front. Make sure that this is horizontal. So just like that, from my perspective, that looks pretty darn flat. So from my perspective here, that is horizontal. And then back here, there's this set screw, and we just tighten this down. So now it should stay in that position. So now it should be locked in there. And now what we're going to do is same deal, sharpening the tip so that we can actually see our cuts. And then you actually, with this tool, can also machine what's called the gash right back there. Feel free to refer to the manual if you're taking off so much material that you need to redo the gash. So we have that done. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to touch off on the tip until we're taking off some material, and then go back and forth. And then for this one, you want to get just to the middle, and you don't want to cross over, because this is a plunging end mill, so the flutes go all the way to the middle. So we're going to turn this on. One other note is technically you only need to sharpen or grind the secondaries when the primaries have become too big. So your primary should be about a 32nd to a 64th of an inch, a 64th to a 32nd of an inch wide. If it's getting bigger than that, because you're removing more material, then you need to cut it back with a secondary so that there's room for material to pass through that clearance. If your primary is already pretty small and the secondary is still big, then you don't need to cut the secondary. I'm just showing you here in case you do. So we're going to turn this on. And now the position of this is fixed. So all we can manipulate is the position of the grinder. So what we're going to do is move this just over here and then glance off the tip just until we hear it. All right, and then we'll advance one more increment on this wheel. And now we're going to come forward or backward, and now forward, and we want to go just to the middle. So when you're doing this operation, even though this slide shouldn't be moving, it does have a little bit of play, which hopefully we'll get rid of. But it's not a bad idea just to maintain tension with your backhand, or pressure, either way, but just be consistent. So actually, if you maintain pressure, then if you let go, it will just bounce away, which isn't such a bad thing. So what I'll do is just apply a little pressure. Now move forward a little bit. And now I'll use my other hand to go through the range of motion on here. And we're just going to go right to the middle. And then back. All right, so now that we've cut the primary on that side, we're going to do the primary on the other side. So we're just going to pull up on this pin and move to the other number 2, which is on the other side. And now we should be flat over here. So we're going to take another cut on this side. All right, and those are the primaries now. This tool puts in a 2-degree fishtail, so it's angled a little bit like that, 2 degrees, automatically, and so that's good. And then for this, which can plunge cut or center cut, we want to just make sure that on both sides we go right to the middle. So now that we've done the primaries, we want to do the secondaries, which we do by modifying this lever. So right now it's in the primary position, and then we loosen this very tight knob, and it drops down, and now it's in the secondary position. So again, we're going to turn this off just to sharpen the edge. And now we can do these secondaries. So we're just going to bring this forwards. Right to the middle. And that looks pretty good. So then we're going to change to the other position back here. So this number 2. And now that we're at this number 2, we're going to come forward. And cut the secondary on there. And we can turn it off. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So it takes a little bit of practice, and if you use really small end mills with a lot of flutes, then it can get pretty tricky. Keeping the stylus right in there and getting just to the end without hitting the other flutes. So it just takes a little practice. Again, the manual underneath is really good. The way to take this out is just by holding the back as well as the front, and then twisting it loose, and that, turn it a bunch, will release the collet. And then, I mean, the real proof is if it cuts well, so you can take it over to a Bridgeport and see if you get good cuts. We're just going to put the collet back and turn the air off, which is right back here. And the light. And that's all there is to it. Thanks for watching.